Okay, good morning, friends. Don't know if this is going to be a particularly long session, but I did want to give an update on the anomaly we saw going on here in Tahoma2D yesterday, because this was pretty interesting. So I'll just post what happened and you guys can puzzle it out as you see fit. What I did was I loaded this scene, which, as you guys recall yesterday, every time I clicked to do fill operations down here in this region, we would get this really strange glitch. What I did was I had a version of this before the glitch occurred, which has been really, I'm glad for that because I've been able to do a lot of tests. Anyway, I loaded this project without the glitch into the version of Tahoma2D, which I think is 1.5, but I'm not sure. But it's the version I run on my Linux laptop. When I loaded it into Linux, the significant thing was that every single one of the MyPaint materials appeared as just a flat red. All of these appeared to be just red and basically nothing. When I took, so I thought, okay, I better avoid the MyPaint brushes. I grabbed this material, did the fill operation, and wango bango, it worked perfectly. I did not have referral, or what's the term? Refer visible. I didn't have that activated. So anyway, that's what happened. I loaded it into Linux, was able to fill these, and then when I saved it, I bring it in here. Whether it's going to start acting silly here or would, I have no idea, but it seems to have solved itself. So those were my steps. Load up this project in Linux, do the fills there, save it, wango bango. Anyway, so I posted on Discord, I believe, on the Tahoma2D channel, basically to Tom Doing Art, because he's been helping me through this, that it does appear to me that going forward, if you want to use Tahoma2D and you want it to work, reasonably robustly, then it's probably better at the ink and paint stage to stick to native OpenToonz or Tahoma2D materials. Stick to these. This problem came up. The context is having used a MyPaint brush for the ink work. Certainly not a necessary thing. I just kind of liked the way it looked. And so, anyway, if you use the native materials, you'll probably run into fewer problems. Now, this shot doesn't really matter because the truth is I already finished the whole shot in Krita by salvaging what I could and just going over there. So, all right, so I'm going to do a couple things here. On the other screen, I need to load the show. And there we go. I don't mind switching screens if I keep OBS open in my third window so that I don't forget that I've switched screens. Okay, so where did we get to last night? It seems to me I did a short session last night. Oh yes, so we're seeing Melchizidek get booted. Boop. Okay, and then I got you. So let's go back to, I think it must have been Blender. Let me load up Blender and switch back here. And I suppose we were doing ink and paint. Okay, so by the way, I wanted to mention another thing. Like, there's probably 2 people in the entire galaxy that would give a rip about this, but I'm gonna share it anyway because I'm one of the 2. And what it is if you're like me, if you look at Blender as being essentially 5 completely different applications that have a lot of similarities, just like OpenToonz and Tahoma2D have similarities, right? So same code base. Okay, I think of Blender as being essentially 5 different programs. There's the version that was before 2.5. There's the version between 2.5 and 2.8. There's the version that got you from 2.8 to 2.9. Now I have to say that 2.8 and 2.9 are the most similar, but they're still different. And then you got 3 and 4, which I don't use. Anyway, so here's my point. For those who care, I realized today that if you look at the feature set of Blender 2.83 compared to 2.81, 2.83 is actually more similar to 2.93 because 2.83 introduced the different masking method, more flexible and powerful, but also more housekeeping required. And it also introduced vertex paint to the grease pencil. So for me, the key versions for Blender would be, like I said, for the one other person in the galaxy that is like me in this regard, it would be 2.49, whatever was the last one before 2.5. It would be 2.79, the last version before 2.8, which I think is 2.79b. And then here's the key thing I noticed today. The similarities between 2.83 and 2.93 are sufficiently the same, but yet on a less a poorly powered laptop, for example, 2.81 is palpably better performing than 2.93. Okay, so it's like Blender Lite versus Blender Full within this, period of versions I'm talking about. Point of the diatribe is, for me, the definitive versions would be 2.81 before they added the vertex paint, and then 2.93. For what I'm doing right now, I'm basically using 2.93. But if I had to do a 3D model and a quick and dirty rig setup, like really rig it with a full skeleton or something, I would seriously, personally look at 2.49. And I'm not joking, because it's not as powerful. This is what you can always say with Blender. The later versions, of course, are more flexible, more powerful, but they're not necessarily more stable. Blender has always been kind of crash prone, and the versions I use are about as non-crash prone as it gets. I mean, Blender is probably the most robust program in my arsenal, but over my lifetime of using it, which goes back to 1999, usually along the way, any new version is, just riddled with bugs and crashes and stuff. It's just the way it's been. So anyway, the point of the story today being that the definitive versions, if I was gonna have 2 versions only at my disposal, it'd probably be 2.81, which is probably, it's either A or B, I'm not sure, and 2.93. However, for me personally, I actually like 2.79 because it's so much different than 2.8. And again, on the rigging side, 2.49 is actually really impressive. The main thing is, if you have a simple 3D model and you want to just set up bones, and like you want the influence of the bones on the mesh to be as intuitive as possible, like you just set it up and forget it. Like it just comes up with the right weighting of everything, so it kind of works pretty much the way you expect. For those who don't know what I'm talking about, picture a 3D model. Like you draw your, here's Gumby 3D model, and then you create a bunch of bones, right? Bone, 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 blah, 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 etc. Okay. To set up a quick and dirty rig like that, where this is actually going to behave pretty darn close to what you would expect it to do with no fiddling around with vertex weights or anything, for that, as far as I've been able to ever tell, 2.49 was actually the best at that. Every step forward has been way more powerful and way more flexible. Drivers, different relationships between this bone and that bone, things like that. Definitely more powerful, but also, just like with masking, just more housekeeping required. That's basically the trade-off. You gain power and flexibility in exchange for having to jump through a few hoops to make it all work, which is not, not a bad thing, not a good thing. It's just a thing. Okay, so let's go back to, I guess we were doing 2.93. Aha, that's where we were. Okay. So let me see what's going on in the chat. Nothing much. But Tom, if you're here, just let me know if you sort of caught the drift of what I said earlier. Okay, yeah, so Mel. So this guy's going to be ranting and shaking his fist. So obviously it would be smart to put his fist a little bit away from the body. So in other words, yeah. This should probably be more like that. If it's running off screen a little bit, that doesn't matter. So that we're not giving ourselves unnecessary grief at sculpting time. You joined 2 minutes ago? Yeah, okay. I'll do a quick recap. I loaded this into Tahoma on Linux. So I've got a Linux. Let me think. I don't think it's like a flat pack or anything. But anyway, I mean, on my Linux laptop, the fast one, I loaded this up. And immediately when I loaded it, every single one of the MyPaint materials was just red. Now, I know you've seen that before. That's a phenomenon we've probably all seen at one time or another, right? So all of these were just red. No MyPaint icons. Okay? And I grabbed the native material, did the fill operation, it worked fine. It filled right up. Then I saved it, brought it over here to, now I'm back on Windows. So I was able to save it. There's no point finishing the scene because I already finished it 3 days ago or something in Krita. But it appears, my takeaway was this, Tom. Basically, very simply, my advice to myself is, look, if you like these MyPaint brushes for the pencil test and stuff, which I do, great. When it's time for ink and paint, probably it would be safest to stick with the native materials. That's my thinking. But, to each his own. Okay. So, yeah, Blender versions. I was just kind of surprised because I really didn't realize. I thought of 281 and 283 as being quite similar, and that's actually not true. It's 283 and 293 that are similar. I think the real change in 9.3, because again, the vertex paint and the different way of doing masking in your layers was already there in 283. So I think the big change in 293 would have really been the what do we call them, mesh nodes or modeling nodes? I don't even know the terminology because I just don't even pay attention to the Blender ecosystem, like at all. I spend zero time chasing after what's new with Blender because I just don't care, This guy, did he have wristbands? Me and my stupid wristbands. I'm always like, did he have wristbands or did he have shoulder bands or what did he have? So yeah, on a respectable machine, Blender 2.93 is great. But on my really, really crappy old Lenovo laptop, there's a big difference between 293 and 281. And yet, functionally, in terms of what I do, there's not much difference, really, between the versions. Okay, that guy's looking okay. I think that just to be sort of planning ahead, I'm going to, first of all, I guess I should have that invoked so that I keep my layers separate. Then I want to take this, let's rotate it a little bit and just move it over here. I just want these separate so that when I go ahead and do what I'm doing now and animate it, I'm not sort of fighting with my selections, right? Okay, so let's just go to here, hit the old D key, and we do not have this additive drawing invoked, which means once I start drawing, boop, it's going to completely create a brand new keyframe. Okay, so, which is kind of dumb. Really, I should just draw this one. And then move them back behind. Mm. I don't like that. I thought I'd get a little creative with Luca's eyes, but I don't love what I did. So, that's probably okay though, just as a little indication. Mm-hmm, 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 mm-hmm. Probably be okay. I'm gonna go ahead and erase that, even though it's gonna mess me up at fill time, because it's just easier to see what I'm doing. Nope. That's better. Mm-hmm. Shots like this are really fun. Can be, you know, in the sense of production value, but they're a bit of a pain because the whole idea of having this in front of them is kind of stupid, in the sense that it would make way more sense to just completely draw these guys and then ink them and fill them, because maybe it's a weakness on my part, but it probably is. But when you got these, like you got this arbitrary border, which is the line of the wall, it causes me to not draw as well, right? I won't get the curvature right, and you're sort of, it feels really constrained. This is actually not even correct. His hat really is supposed to be much further back on his head. As a matter of fact, I'm going to do that. Even that's not right, though. See what I mean? If I was, in other words, if I was just going back to sketching, I'd be like, you know, I just loose, you know, I just lay it in loosely, and I would know that this is what it's supposed to be, right? I don't care about the wall. I think that's what I'm going to do. It's just way more fun to do it this way. And then when I go to ink it, at least I know what I'm doing, right? I know where to put my lines. But yeah, I mean, you can see exactly right there. And I only mention it because I find it interesting. It's like this vulnerability that I have as a creative person, where when there's something that constrains the scene or the environment, my ability to draw really is surprisingly compromised. Surprisingly compromised. And it's probably a common phenomenon. I have no idea. I'm just kind of notice it, you know. So, but yeah, this who cares about that stupid wall? We'll put the wall in later, right? And this is the thing I got to say, in terms of animation, this is the thing that's been coming back to me again and again. Is it's just my thing. Other people may feel differently, but to me, it's like when I'm drawing, especially when I'm drawing loosely, sketching. When I'm drawing, everything's cool. I feel like if I try hard, I probably could draw almost anything, right? I might fail 3 times, but I'm going to come close. You know, it's going to be a noble effort anyway. And the more and one of the reasons I think I get a little testy with tools at times is because, you know, I do expect a lot from them. You know, because they're there to make your life easier, right? Facilitate your creative efforts. So when they let you down, of course, it's rather disappointing. Okay, let me zoom way out and almost get the somewhat normal-ish shape for this. Then what I'm going to do is go ahead and touch that to there so it's a closed shape, hit the E key, and then just sculpt this back in. But anyway, I guess my point was that when you have an arbitrary constraint in the shot that is very important to how the final shot's going to turn out. It's really kind of weird how much it impinges on your ability to imagine what you're trying to draw and then just draw it accurately, you know. I don't know if others have this problem. It could be dyslexic Dave. You know, could be unique. I don't know. Okay. All right. Now these guys are going to be just poked back behind. So they're going to poke out. And this is, I believe, a duplicate of this. We might as well see. Yeah. So they go psst. Okay, so this is where we need to turn on that additive drawing. And that way we're just modifying existing frames. I know what you mean. I hit the seam on an envelope today while writing in pencil. It stopped me. I draw the line in the opposite direction to solve it. That is actually a really good example of the kind of thing I'm talking about. It's like, I mean, it is really strange. I mean, it's a really strange aspect of the human condition in that we have this creative impulse, right? Nobody really knows where it comes from. You know, but it's a beautiful thing. It's the way we take what we know from the past and synthesize it into some kind of new idea. It's very important to evolution and progress and everything else, and enjoyment of life. You know? And so it's like this really precious aspect, right, of the human condition that is frighteningly fragile. In the sense that, in your case, I could just imagine me doing the same thing. Like you're sitting there at the breakfast table, maybe you're drinking your coffee or something, and you kind of get an idea, something you want to doodle. And there's an envelope sitting on the table, right? And so then you start doodling it, and at that moment, you instantly are in this alpha state where you're just creating it, and you're seeing what you see in your mind begin to appear on the paper. And of course, the perennial conflict or challenge we all have as artists is when what we see emerging in front of us doesn't match. Usually it's not that it doesn't match what we see in our mind, because most people, I don't think, are able to visualize that vividly. But what happens is it feels different. Like you're drawing, and then all of a sudden you can tell I drew a wrong line or something, and it no longer has the feeling or the emotional signature of the idea that was in my imagination. But that's parenthetical to the main point you're bringing up, which is the way you're doing that. It's a singularly enjoyable experience, right? That alpha state kind of thing. And then you hit the seam on the other side of the paper, and it interrupts your and like instantly snaps you out of that alpha state, right? When I'm sitting at a desk and there's some clutter blocking my movement, I need to move stuff to have freedom of movement. I feel that too. I think our sensitivity. I'm not a clutter freak, or I'm not a clean freak, that's for sure. And I do trend toward clutter, accumulating, right? However, in my workspace, totally agree. If I walk in and the environment is cluttered, it's because I think it's because I'm a creative soul. It is probably because I have tons of new ideas always bouncing around in my head. That clutter just obfuscates that pure creative flow. Probably because, and I think some people can overcome it. Some people can ignore it successfully, and genuinely. But I think what happens is that clutter enters your mind, and then now all of a sudden you're dealing with narratives in your mind. This all happens very quickly about what the clutter means. The worst thing is when the clutter introduces into your awareness something else that maybe needs to be done or wants to be done, or I hate using the word should, but that should be done, that's now competing in your mind with what you went into the environment to do. If you're like me, that happens all the time. And the reason is because, and I have to fight it constantly, is that my core wiring My core wiring, I can't state this emphatically enough, it's so true and I hate it, but this is the way it is. My core wiring is that whatever is the thing that I want to do that's most precious to me, that I most enjoy doing, that I most want to do, my conditioning from my past says that, and I'm not blaming this on anybody. Yes, there are traumas and treatments that led to it, but basically my own mind took a it's like what I talked about the other day about familiarity. If you're used to this, that is normal for you. So the normal for me is that whatever I want to do is the least important thing. Whatever else clutter-wise, the most mundane, anything pops in front of me, I am going to emotionally feel like, okay, I should do that first. Always everything first before the thing I really want to do for me. I don't know why this is. I'm convinced that overcoming that is one of the key universal challenges or quests that all human beings face. It's the conflict between, and I think it's probably more pronounced in Western culture because of the Christian tradition. You know, the Christian tradition is, you know, my opinion about it, golly, I want to wrap this into 20 seconds max. Basically, yes, the Christian thing did happen historically. It's probably, but not necessarily true that Jesus, as he is portrayed in the Bible, in terms of the character of Jesus, not talking about the viability of the miracles or anything. You can argue about that separately. But as far as that guy at that time, yeah, I mean, it's pretty possible that he was a guy. And then, I know I'm over my 20 seconds, but what happened was that what sprung up was a bunch of miscellaneous cults that had very little in common with each other in terms of their belief system. Some of them are reincarnationists, blah, 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 blah. You know, the Gnostic thing. They weren't really competing with each other. What happened was, you know, you got this prophet dude that's, you know, out on the hillside and kind of word gets out. I'm sure that happened. Word gets out. The story begins to get mythologized and changed a bit in order to make it a little more enticing. And then what you see is, basically a couple hundred years later, long after the events happened, Constantine comes in, pals up with Titus Flavius, who was the cousin, of course, of Josephus. I think I mentioned this the other day. So Josephus, so like Christians will say, yeah, but you know, Josephus, that's the secular proof of the story of the Jesus story of the Bible is made somehow more certain or credible by the fact that Jesus was mentioned by Josephus in his secular historical writings. The problem is there's two things you have to consider about that. Number one, all that was mentioned was a singular mention of, yeah, there's some dude way over, 50 miles away that they call Christos. And there's some skirmishy stuff going on over there about that guy. Like, he's got some followers and blah, blah, blah. But it's basically a single mention of this Christos character. And the truth is, that could have applied to probably hundreds, if not thousands, of different people. There were many, many Christs. In fact, it even says so in the Bible. There were many who came along and made the claim and were either debunked or rejected for whatever reason you want to talk about. Okay? So that doesn't mean that, and that's because obviously the Jews at that time were looking for a military leader. I mean, they were looking for a coup. And that was what Rome was afraid of. So now in the time of Constantine, a couple hundred years later, you've got these different cults bopping up. They're basically in conflict with each other in terms of what they believe, certainly. And they're certainly in conflict with the Pharisees. And Rome was kind of, I don't want to say diplomatic because they were pretty dictatorial, but the way they would come into a land and basically say, look, if you behave yourselves and swear fealty to Caesar, then you can kind of run your own game. That was kind of Rome's MO, and it was partly why they were able to expand so much. So anyway, at this time, around 200 years later, I mentioned Josephus because Josephus was a cousin of Titus Flavius. And Titus Flavius specifically was the guy that was commissioned by Constantine to basically engage in the propaganda campaign that established this unification of a Christian tradition, which was a synthesis of all the traditions that already existed. The purpose was to institutionalize a new religion. The Christian thing made perfect sense because it did have a lot of followers, but its belief systems were actually all over the map. So Constantine says, okay, we got to unify this thing. The whole idea is to unify the culture under the auspices of this religion about this suffering Savior that's all about meekness. Why? Because we've got this problem of these skirmishy sort of uprisings happening every once in a while. This might be a way to unify the kingdom under a common umbrella of belief, which of course you have no choice but to swear allegiance to. There's that little detail. But and in doing so, establishing that, he was able to bring on everybody, again by compulsion, under this umbrella, which then evolved into the Catholic Church and moves us into the Middle Ages. And the Middle Ages, if you want to talk about the Christian tradition, was a period of some of the most horrific, craftily devised ways of torturing and exploiting and extracting life, limb, and treasure from people in the history of the world. There's not much there that recommends it in terms of history. So I'm not sure what got me on that, but it was, I think it started with these things about the human condition. Oh yes, in Western culture, because of the Christian tradition, going back now 2,000 years, in different permutations and in different levels of strength that it imposed on the culture or subculture. But that tradition is really grounded in a couple ideas that were well crafted. The Council of Nicaea, it's like, oh, well, we need to have unity, right? And the way we have unity is we take the two guys who disagree and kick them out. That's what they did. Unity was a mandate, right? And what do we decide the canon of the scriptures is going to be? And then we've got to craft this mythology about the divinity of the leadership so that people respect it and obey. It was all about controlling populations. And if you look through history, generally that's what religion is. It's always about controlling populations. In modern day, why is Project 2025 and, the Christian right, and parenthetically, there's a lot of people that are really trying to live their life as good people because of the Christian tradition in their life, that are in that camp, right? I'm not impugning all the individuals, not by any means, but those who crafted the plan certainly understand that we've got a long historical tradition of if you want to keep people under control, specifically so that you can extract from them easily, then often religion becomes a tool in the toolkit to establish that. I mean, think about it. The most simple example would be in the Middle Ages. Okay, I'm afraid I'm going to die and literally burn forever. And I'm being told that is indeed exactly what's going to happen to me, unless I pay indulgences to the church and basically buy my way out of the situation. If you can get terror to be struck into someone's soul, they're going to do a lot, right, to avoid the thing they're afraid of. Anyway, the Christian tradition is in direct conflict with the concept of self-love. Now, if you get into a conversation with a Christian, they will try. And I know, because I lived as an evangelical Christian for 25 years. I lived it. I was a praise and worship leader for 8 years. I mean, I was drinking the Kool-Aid. Okay? And so I know that there are very decent, good people that are part of that club. I just have a problem. The more I learned about how the club was arrived at in the first place and its track record over history, I kind of came to the conclusion that this has been really, really destructive to the human experience. And the main reason it's destructive to the human experience even today is because if you're going to take your life and your basic paradigm, everybody has a model in their head, right? Everyone has in their mind a model of that which is what they believe. Okay, this is normal. You want to have a model, okay? But if the model is demonstrably, provably awash in mythical assumptions, then the chances are very good that you're going to make some bad decisions. So the argument, of course, contrary is going to be that ethically and morally you'll make good decisions because you'll be an ethical, moral person, like you're trying to live like Jesus, and that might in fact be true. You might be a very moral and ethical person. But the problem is that this propagates through the whole culture. It's how we teach our children. Instead of encouraging them to have critical thinking, instead of encouraging them to make mistakes, make their own decision. I'll give you advice. I'll give you guidance, but I'm going to let you make your own mistakes. I'm going to let you own your own decision. That way when it goes wrong, you can't blame me. I didn't make you do it. Allegorical in most cases with the Bible, and I actually think I don't think we have to put it in a box. It is allegorical, and it is also just words of wisdom, proverbs and things. It's also historical, and it's within the historical domain. It is probably accurate and less accurate to varying degrees depending on what book or passage you're talking about. I don't need to put a single label on the whole thing. What I can say for sure is that historically this has been a tool in the toolkit of oppressors and exploiters. That is a fact. I'm not saying there's so many ways that can cause a knee-jerk reaction. Like, for example, if I'm going to criticize Cortez or something, right, or going over to South America and basically spreading disease and mayhem everywhere in the search for gold or this type of thing. Okay, I can impugn that guy, and then somebody else is going to say, well, wait a minute. When he got there, the Aztecs, what were they doing? I mean, they're doing these religious thing. They're literally human sacrificing thousands of people. I mean, it's a bloody kind of culture that they were pretty screwed up too. And I would say, yeah, exactly. But you notice that their screwed upness was also born of religion. It was born of mythology. It was a story they told themselves about how to appease the gods. And it's kind of crazy because of cognitive flaws. A lot of times all you need is one false positive to convince you that certain dynamics occur when in fact they don't. Right? So if does a high salt intake coincide or correlate to high blood pressure? Well, it might in many cases. But does that mean that high salt intake causes high blood pressure? It could be, but you've got to do the science and find out. Well, it turns out that human beings are enormously bad at drawing good conclusions without doing good science. So the danger of religion is basically what you're doing is you're coming in here either philosophically or spiritually or politically. You're coming in and what you're saying is this. You're saying we don't need to do science. We don't need to be open-minded. Why? Because we have the book. And the book has always been right. It's perfect. And so if we follow the maxims ascribed by the book, everything will be wonderful. We'll have a golden age. Well, I mean, okay, that's an interesting proposition. My question to that is, okay, well, what's the track record? I mean, how's the book been doing for the last 2,000 years in terms of socio-cultural outcomes? And the answer is, it's a pretty sketchy track record, like very sketchy. Okay, so I'm going to take a moment and look at I figured Amar would show up. Look at it as an offshoot of the story of the Egyptians. It's interesting because you guys all seem to be, and your basic beliefs seem to be similar to me. It's like you probably have respect for the Christian tradition, but you're not a whack job. You're not an evangelical, which I was, especially in college, at the time that I got married. And actually, the saddest part is that, my ex-wife is a decent person. She's got her quirks, but basically she's a decent person. We would have been tremendous friends if it was not for the Christian thing. I don't think we would have married in a million years. We were too different in terms of our just general tastes and proclivities and preferences of life. And so the Christian thing was part of the glue that held it together. So of course my thinking expanded a lot more post-divorce, but it was certainly starting earlier. And, it didn't help. It didn't help, because I was growing in directions that became uncomfortable, for her. Anyway, the sad thing is once you look at things with the common sense approach, you see through the nonsense. Pretty much. Yep. Yeah, and sometimes I make these observations as they are in my own mind, as if they were fairly profound. And I think a lot of people, probably you guys, you hear that and you go, and I mean, I've had other people specifically, face to face, have the same reaction. It's like, okay, Dave, I mean, that's an interesting observation, but so what? Like, what's so profound about it? The thing is that for me, with my background and my conditioning, it is profound because it's a real switch from the way I used to think and operate. I find anything that's mythical is wonderful for telling stories, for creating allegories, for helping someone to think about something a different way. That's great. Once you purport that the myth is truth, you're getting into really shaky territory. Even if, and this is probably the most important point, even if it turns out, we all die and get on the other side, and it turns out the myth was actually 100% true. I say to that, who cares? If its track record in the material world is so shady, I couldn't care less if it's actually true. I mean, it seems enormously unlikely. That doesn't mean all spiritual traditions are unlikely. I mean, if you get into preservation of energy and you start thinking about what we're learning right now about consciousness and the true nature of it and all this, honestly, we're getting into shaky territory here, but the most likely reality is that the universe is actually just a single organism. It's a single organism, and we are all just expressions of that organism, but we're all actually one thing, because that's what's true in your body. I mean, your body isn't just a single thing. Your body is actually a collective. It's an ecosystem with more cells in your body that are not even native to your body than there are cells that are native to your body. You're basically a haven for germs, and your biome, meaning the gut flora in your gut, is unique. It's unique to you. Everyone's is a little bit different. It's really fascinating stuff. Question nothing and follow blindly. Okay, yet consciously, you have to question everything and trust only the truth you know and feel. I believe in energy in, energy out. There's something that causes this creation we live in, but I don't assign a sex or a name to it. Okay, that's interesting. Don't mind creating stories about it. This has been one of the things that's linked us universally. That's right. The storytelling itself. That's a good thing. That's why The Matrix is one of my favorite movies of all time. Yeah, a lot of people love The Matrix. The movie was all about hope and seeing through the nonsense. I doubt that's true, that we are mostly non-human cells. It does depend, Tom, on how you look at it. If you look at it in terms of volume, like by weight or by actual numerically number of cells, there's different ways to look at it. The takeaway, though, is that within your body, a significant, we're into trillions and trillions of microbes exist as an ecosystem and facilitate what happens in your body. For example, you might have a microbe that creates an enzyme, and then your body actually uses that enzyme to turn an amino acid into a protein. But it wouldn't be able to generate that protein without that enzyme, and yet that enzyme's being provided by a critter. Now, if that critter wasn't around, would your body find some other way to find or manufacture that enzyme? Yeah, probably. But it is all a continuously evolving process. We could get into what evolution really means, but mostly human, but hosting foreign elements. Now, I that's not a good way to think of it, Tom. I just tell you, you might want to look into that and get back with me. And if you're right, I'd love to hear it. But I think you're wrong. What we're finding is the more we look, the closer we look, the better tools we have. The more we're finding that every single type of tissue in the human body is completely inundated with microbes. Trillions. Viruses, bacteria, various kinds of microbes of different scale and purpose. The important reason to acknowledge that is to understand that probably the Western Christian informed sort of way of thinking about what makes a human human is probably pretty wrong. Because you are an ecosystem. The thing that's fascinating to me is how rapidly that ecosystem is able to react to perception and respond. It's just so clear that I think the example I gave once before is that if something frightens you, think about how quickly adrenaline, your body recognizes that there's a problem or potential problem, and just basically injects adrenaline into your system, and the whole thing happens so freaking fast. It's incredible, and it really should cause us to ask the question, in terms of our ability to condition and learn and train ourselves, have we even scratched the surface of what we're able to do as humans? I suspect we haven't. And the reason we haven't is the same reason that progress is hard. It's the problem of inertia. Probably the core force, if you will, that's most prevalent. It's not necessarily a thing in the sense that maybe you could say electrical charge is a thing, or you could argue gravity's a thing, although that's debatable. Lost my train of thought. So inertia isn't necessarily a thing in the sense that it's a force, but it's a property. It's a characteristic, okay, of almost everything at every scale. Like almost everything at every scale. Meaning, if you're a single cell microbe, what are you going to do today? You're probably going to do what you did yesterday. Why? Because you're alive. You are not yet dead. Therefore, whatever the hell you did yesterday must have worked. And that's basically what happens. But as I say, it happens really fast. It happens in your thinking. What are you going to think today? You're probably going to think stuff that's pretty darn close to what you were thinking yesterday. And the reason for that is very clear and simple. It's obvious. You are not yet dead. And if whatever you were doing yesterday has seemingly kept you alive up till today, then as a survival mechanism, of course it makes sense that you would do today what you did yesterday. That's why change is hard. So what you have to do is you have to consciously decide what it is you want that's different from what you're already habitualized to do. And you better know that no matter how good that thing you want to do is, no matter how good that improvement represents, some people want to lose weight or get in shape or eat better, who knows. Whatever it is you want to do is going to be difficult every time, no matter what. Why? Because it's always going to feel safest and most comfortable to revert to what you were doing habitually. Always. And nature's that way too. That's why I use the single cell example. That's why it's a significant point. It's a significant point because it's not just about people improving their life and stuff. It's literally at all scales. All of nature tends to continue to do what it did before. And then what happens is you get interactions between things that then impose upon each other, that force a reaction that isn't necessarily preferred, but you don't really have any choice because something's imposing on you. That's what weather is. The wind goes along in one direction as kind of a mass, right? And it's got that inertia, but then it runs into a front that's at a different temperature, a different vector, and now all of a sudden the first wind front has to sort of now change and start swirling around and adapting. Well, guess what? That's what you're doing in your body and in your thinking 100% of the time your entire life. At the macro level, at the micro level, at the atomic level, at the level of your goals, at the level of the way you think and process reality in real time, at all of these levels, it's the same. You've got tools that you've been given by nature to perceive. You very, very rapidly make assessments, which often are wrong, but generally, even if they're wrong, they will tend to favor what you've done in the past because, again, evidently, that's kept you alive so far. And it just goes to show that people can have very dysfunctional habits and yet still live a pretty long life. You know? Okay, so using you as an example, Dave, you're continuously trying different things and hitting conditions where software fails. Yeah, I do tend to be like right at the edge of the capabilities. That is true. If you instead followed a more repeatable process, less crashes. You're right. You're right. Less poking around and more sticking with kind of the tried and true. I agree. Yep. The thing that holds us, and the problem is, okay, I can address that specifically vis-a-vis this philosophical stuff I'm sharing. I can explain why I'm that way. I have an addiction to novelty. That is a fact. I have an addiction to novelty. In other words, in my past, switching to something new has been, put it this way, the weakness, let me elucidate what the weakness is that's baked into that. The weakness is, in the past, is that I didn't tend to finish things, or I never stuck with them long enough to actually get my craft up to the level of mastery. Hence, as a piano player, as a animator, in almost every area that matters, I have tended to be a slow bloomer. I'm a slow developer. And I think one key reason for that is the addiction to novelty. It's more gratifying, although less long-term rewarding, but in the immediate, in other words, less satisfying, but more gratifying to just jump from pillar to post. And it's probably why I rant about newbies that are coming to the animation game, not getting caught up in that. Find something that works and stick with it, because what matters in the long run is the work you've done. It's the pictures you drew. It's not the tool, right? I have not followed that advice, all the time. That's for sure. I have jumped from pillar to post. And it's not the worst thing. I mean, you do discover, A, pathways that do work, and B, sometimes you uncover things that other people don't uncover. But the overall progress tends to be on the slow side. So, pros and cons, right? So, but your point is correct. I mean, I'm not just saying I agree with you. I think it's absolutely correct. Thing that holds us back is if we use 3D, we trace, we use AI and other tools that automate or shortcut our storytelling process. So constantly seeking change has a cost. Yes. Never seeking change, more repeatable, but entropy. When we fight going down that route, I still see that practically these tools have been saying the same thing for the last 20 plus years. You can do it this way, but your ego says, correct, yes. Amar's, you've done a good job of unpacking what goes wrong, and I think that it's basically what goes wrong. Let me give you this advice. The reason this goes wrong is because you are in a consumerism climate. Even in the open source space, you're still in a climate where you're being presented with new features, YouTube videos about this and that. It's always this enticement thing. And the reason for the enticement thing isn't because the tools and their capabilities are actually that great. The enticement thing is because the climate that you're swimming in has as its number one goal capturing your eyeballs. Because it's actually the advertising model of YouTube is what creates that climate. So the climate being all about a specific domain, like in this case, say animation software or animation habits, that's a coincidence. That's just one permutation of a greater issue, right? So when you're in that climate, there's an emotional argument that you have with yourself over, especially if you think about in the climate of AI that we're in right now, you're constantly saying, oh, am I keeping up? Am I doing the right thing? Am I learning the right thing so that I'm ready for the next thing? I think the important takeaway to that way of thinking is, well, wait a second. Were you ready for the last thing? Did you ever even achieve competence in the last thing? Because we've got this tendency to keep thinking we've got to be prepared for the next thing, when in fact we've never even come close to mastering the last thing. So what delusion makes you think all this poking around is going to get you to a place where you've mastered the new thing anyway? By the time you actually achieve some competence, the entire techno sphere domain will actually have passed you anyway. And so what I find over and over and over is, you know what are the things that actually are lasting? It's the basics. Writing, drawing, communicating. It could be coding. That's kind of just a form of writing. But those core skills, imagining in vivid detail, taking those core functionalities to create something that maybe people can enjoy, which is what I'm trying to do with an animated story, obviously. That's way more important than whatever tool you might use to do it. And let me give you an obvious reason why. What if you didn't have these digital tools? Think about it. What would you do? Well, maybe you'd do it on paper. Maybe you'd kind of make something that is akin to a comic book, but maybe with some notations that imply what you would do from an animation standpoint. And then what you would do is, if this was 50 years ago, from a budgetary standpoint, you wouldn't be able to create a cartoon. Okay? So the point is, you just creatively, you'd say, well, okay, well, what do I do? And what you would have to do in that climate is you would have to find either investors or partners or other people that maybe have the equipment or possibly employment. But you'd have to team up with somebody else so that you could actually get the thing done, because it was financially and logistically prohibitive at that time. But the thing is that the core skills, the determination that would lead somebody back then to put the deal together so they could get their cartoon made, however they need to do it, that's the tenacity that you need today. And the problem is that in the climate where you're swimming around, all of this AI stuff and all of these new tools and features and all this stuff where the world is telling you need to keep up, really because it's lying to you. It's telling you that because it wants to hang on to your eyeballs. And here's the ironic thing, and Amar, I'm going to ask this to you. I'm going to throw this out directly at you, and you ask me if you've noticed the same thing in your life. There's one thing I noticed that is almost frightening. I've noticed that if you get past the talent, or not the talent, let me say that again. If you get past the skill set that I have today, for example, like I use Reaper to create music, and there's certain virtual instruments that I've kind of gotten to know, like in my domain. Same with Blender. There's things I kind of know about it. I'm not necessarily a guru, but I've learned the tools. What's really interesting to notice, to me, is that when I look at how well I can craft a melody compared to when I was 22 years old, I'm not that much better. The talent, and therefore the desire to be able to create a good melody, was always there. And the basic talent was what it was. I'm not that much better at craft. Now, what I am better at is when I start working with the tools to craft it into a good arrangement, let's say, so that the music I produce is probably going to be better than it was back then. But the core thing that makes it all viable, that makes someone say, maybe there's a talent there, that hasn't actually improved that much. I don't draw that much better than I did 20, 30 years ago. A little better, but not much. And if that's true, doesn't it suggest that all of this getting bogged down in the tools has really just been more of a distraction than anything for all those decades? So I'm asking Amar, have you noticed the same thing? I'll bet you have. I'll bet you don't draw that much better than you did when you were 18 or 20. Maybe 25. They say the brain stops maturing-ish around 25 kind of thing. So let's just say up through 25. I'll bet you're not that much better than when you were 25. And if that's true, then the good news is that the capacity and the talent, the raw ability to do whatever the hell you want to do has always been there. It's always been there. There's been something that stopped you from taking it and applying it in such a way that it moves you towards what you really want. And what we talked about the other day, of course, is that there's other forces inside of you that basically tell you you don't deserve that. And it can be as simple, like today, it could be as simple as, well, you haven't kept up with the latest Blender feature, therefore you don't deserve to create your own cartoon, because until you go and read that article or watch that YouTube video and test it yourself and then can demonstrate it to your friends and blah, blah, until you've done this, that, and the other. It's just an example I'm making up, obviously. But that's the argument you have inside yourself. Until you do this, until you meet all these prerequisites, you don't get to be you. You don't get to love you. You don't get to be passionate about what you really dig. And just give yourself full permission to just fucking do it. Nope, you don't get to. And I find that fascinating. I find it truly fascinating how prevalent those inhibitive dynamics in our psyches are. Particularly amongst creative people. Sensitive, decent, creative people that are hindered. It's kind of weird, actually. Okay, so I see so many IPs that have moved beyond where I've been, and they continue to, whereas they just took where we at and said, this is what I'm going to... Yeah, exactly. That's it. You captured it. That's right. You have to have an almost angry decision where you declare war, and you won't be able to make that decision and then stick to it. You'll make the decision, and then you'll have a setback, and you'll have to sort of think it through again and go around the whole psycho-emotional block pathway back to where you realize, okay, this is what I need to do. I need to own myself. I need to respect and love myself and honor myself, even when it's uncomfortable. And then you're going to fail again. And what's going to happen is over time you'll get more and more. What will happen is you will finally begin to get used to what it feels like to own yourself. And then, as that becomes habit, you will increasingly begin to express the ideas that you truly find most inspiring, precious, valuable, useful, worthy of communicating, whatever. And I don't mean that in terms of words. It could be words, it could be art, it could be animation, whatever. The point, the entire point for people like me, and I count anyone who comes here to be people like me, is for you to be creatively liberated and not be inhibited from enjoying the ride. Not everybody's going to have a product that succeeds. But think about that. If there's a good chance that my product's not going to succeed, then at least let me enjoy the path of getting there. If I'm going to get to failure, at least let the hours and the minutes be enjoyable, for God's sake. Why be miserable? Because most of us are doing the opposite. You're working a job you hate because ostensibly, at some point maybe there's going to be enough money there where you can kind of freaking relax. All right, I'm going to finish going through the comments, and then looks like Zuko and Val are walking in, so I'm going to ditch out of here. All right, youth, youth is wasted on the young, though. Isn't that true? Youth is completely wasted on the young. They need to give some more of that back to us, Amar. I fight with the idea, do I get it done no matter how bad it's just getting it done? I think if you're not in the moment, truly getting to that place where you're comfortable just respecting yourself and your own proclivities, you're always still going to have this fight. I think the point of help would be, and I think Valerie, who's standing behind me, would reiterate this, is the point is that if you get to the end of your life, so you've got dynamics in place that have inhibited you, let's say, okay, you're kind of describing a little bit of that, right? Okay, if you get to the end of your life and you still have not overcome that, here's what truly is going to happen. You're going to look in the mirror and you're going to go, oh my God, I have no one to blame for that but me. That is exactly what you will tell yourself. Now, it would be better to look in the mirror today and say, I have no one to blame but me. If you quantify, like you have to go, let's say you have to go to a job. You have to hop on Chicago Transit and go to a job. I don't know if you do at this point. Whatever. But let's just say you did. Okay, well, you can still quantify that. I mean, if you go, even in a worst case scenario, it takes you 2 hours to get there, let's say. Now you're working 8 hours, 2 hours, let's say 10 hours. You got to sleep for 8. Well, you know what? It's a crappy equation, but the fact is there's still about 3-4 hours of elective hours in the day there. I'm leaving time to sleep, right? And if you were in that punitive of a situation in terms of your time, where it really was unrealistic, then personally what I would do is I would make it a goal to get really, really good at exercising my imagination while I'm doing mundane work that I don't care. In other words, I would do the mundane work and try to get into the alpha zone, and then let my imagination wander and maybe take notes here and there, but basically exercise my creative self. In the long run, that's going to be a benefit not only to you, but to your employer as well, because you're a guy that's thinking and coming up with creative ideas. I think based on my understanding I put out during the process, I feel like it should be better. Well, but Amar, it's always got to be better. I mean, it always can be better. I look at the first 2 episodes of Salt and Light, and parts of it make me cringe. But you know what? It's making money, and I'm trying to do better. So what can I do? Maybe someday, 5 years from now, I'll go back and redo some of those cuts and re-release it. I mean, I could do that. But basically, you will never be satisfied if you look at the most prolific and happy creative people. So I put Mike Post in that category. I put Stephen J. Cannell in that category. Probably Stephen King is in that category. You can go down the list. But people that are both happy in their work and very, very prolific tend to be people. Rick Emmett's another one, guitar player that influenced me. They all share this same attitude. And this attitude is always that they'll get in an interview and say, hey, what work are you most proud of? And the answer is always the same amongst all these different people that don't even talk to each other. But the answer is the same. And the answer is some form of whatever I'm working on now. Whatever I do next, that's the one I'm most proud of. Their attitude is that I've never arrived, I'm never satisfied, but that's okay. It's just a process, and that's what you want to do. You want to just peacefully say, no, my job is to just every day make it just a little bit better, push it just a little bit further, and don't get too yanked up about it, right? Yeah, as usual, great chat. My goal this year is to find a path I can have a financial path that gives me time to do the projects. Yes, that would be useful. All right, I got to go. I'm kind of running late, so you guys, there will be more later. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, everybody's gone, and that's okay. I don't blame you guys. Slight change in plans, so I'm going to hang out for just a little bit more. So the live stream actually didn't end because the window gave me a warning, and even though I stopped streaming, anyway, you guys get what went on. So I'm going to finish up today's stream this way. I'm going to give an example that sort of sums up everything I was kind of trying to express, and then you guys can do with it what you will if you want to. So this is very, very simple. This is a little thought for the creative friends out there. This is basically the deal. Try to draw a circle, okay? And by the way, look at this. Immediately something went wrong where it isn't even drawing, right? Isn't that interesting? Immediately something goes wrong. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so now I draw a circle. Okay, now I have a choice. This is not a perfect circle. So the question is, what am I going to give my energy to right now? Am I going to give my energy to beating myself up for the fact that it's not a perfect circle? Or am I going to just draw another circle, going to try again? That's it. That's the whole deal. If you just try again, you're owning your own experience. Once you get into your brain and you're beating yourself up because the circle's not perfect, the problem is nobody draws a perfect circle. And the only way you ever get to the perfect circle is by assessing the failure and saying, okay, well, what could I do a little different? And then you do something a little different. And that is the only way you learn, and is the only way you improve, and it's the only way you get to a place where you go, either you're, on the one hand, competent at drawing circles, or B, you recognize, okay, and who gets to judge whether this particular circle is good enough or not? Who gets to decide? Only you. Only you. You decide if it's good enough or not. There's no one else to blame. There's no other objective standard. Otherwise, how do you explain the ascendancy of freaking South Park? No. Those guys just did what they did because they thought it was funny, and that's the end of it. And it just turned out other people liked it too. And so then the only thing I would maybe add to that is to move slow. Give yourself time to make mistakes. Try again. And you decide if it's good enough. And there will come a time, it's a little arbitrary, but there will come a time when you will know. You'll say, you know what? I'm not like the best in the world at this, but I'm probably good enough that moving on to a higher goal, you know, to create some cool thing that I think would be cool is, you know, it's possible for me. I think my skills at the place where, you know what you're up for. When I did this shot a couple days ago, I had no idea what I was doing. I'm like, can I make this look like there's water pouring down in Vespa? I'm not joking. I had no idea if I could pull this off or not. And I just kind of did it intuitively. It was kind of difficult because I had to draw one stream, and then I'm putting all the water on one layer, so I had to come back and modify other keyframes that were timed differently than other keyframes. You know, it was tricky. And it didn't, you know, and actually the first iteration of it didn't quite work. In fact, you can still see a little holdover because right up here, by the way, the flashing, the changing in the lighting, that's just Krita acting stupid. That has nothing to do with it. But if you notice on that first frame, the way this moves right in here isn't quite perfect. Right there, you see? His head moved, but the water didn't. Is that good enough? Well, it probably is good enough. Why? Well, because we're talking about a TV show, and in a TV show, whatever happened in the first to second frame, nobody's ever going to notice. Because what their mind is on is back here. They're thinking about what's storytelling-wise, what's flowing into this shot. So I can get away with a little flaw in the first frame. But then once he settles and the water's dripping, by gum, it better look okay. Doesn't have to look perfect, but it's got to look okay, right? And nobody, you know, someone else, hell, Sifter could probably run circles around me on this, and he could probably do much better job. You know, and maybe you whoever's listening, maybe you could too. You see? So, anyway, all right, that was the point. I'm going to go ahead and sign off for real this time. Not sure what I'm up to from here, but anyway.